In 1.0, each Deathroot was a trimming from a young sapling of the Death Tree that often form on shards of the Rune of Death. This Death Tree immediately brings to mind the tree we saw in the Shadow of the Erdtree announcement, as well as throughout the trailer. Since the Deathroot were saplings of the Death Tree, this tree feeds off of the Rune of Death, and as Enya tells us in both versions,
the Rune of Death goes by two names. The other is Destined Death, the forbidden shadow plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation.
I'll also point out the Golden Order is synonymous with the Erdtree itself, according to this NPC ghost that was added in the Day 1 patch. In other words, if the Rune of Death is the forbidden shadow of the Golden Order, and the Erdtree is synonymous with the Golden Order, then the Rune of Death is the forbidden shadow of the Erdtree. I like to think that this Death Tree and the Erdtree are competing for souls. As another NPC ghost tells us, a proper death means returning to the Erdtree. Have patience until the time comes and the roots call to you. We also know that D is trying to weed out the Deathroot, which can be interpreted as preventing this Death Tree from spreading further into the lands between. It's like these saplings have broken containment or quarantine. Way back when the DLC was first announced, I thought this Shadow Tree was a different type of tree than what we had seen. I don't think this Shadow Tree is Deathblight, since it's missing the buzzing insects and it doesn't have spikes. I also don't think it's the Halig Tree, since it doesn't look like what the Halig Tree was supposed to look like, at least according to this shield. I have seen a theory that it might be burnt, but we don't see any ash under this Shadow Tree, and when we turn the Erdtree into a road flare, Lanedale is completely covered in ash. This Shadow Tree also seems to be producing sap and amber, and I will point out that the Prince of Death's staff is formed from sullied amber. Since the Deathroot were saplings of the Death Tree, they would also be a counterpart to the illusory trees and the minor Erdtrees. The juxtaposition between the Erdtree and a Death Tree would also work on a symbolic level. In more modern interpretations of Kabbalah, the Cliffort is a tree of death, which acts as a reverse of the Tree of Life, and would also make sense considering the connections between shadows and death. In 1.0, the Assassin's Prayer Book was called the Shadowed Prayer Book, and the Crepice Phial was described as a small bottle sealing away the shadow of death. The phrase shadow of death is just so evocative. I honestly would be shocked if it doesn't make an appearance in Shadow of the Erdtree. There are also some really fascinating name changes. The Tibia summons was called the Law of the Undying. This may connect the Law of the Undying to the Golden Order fundamentalist spells like the Law of Causality, the Law of Regression, and in 1.0, Divine Law's Punishment, which is Radagon's Ring of Light today. In 1.0, according to the skeletal militiamen ashes, following the Night of the Black Knives, fragments of death were strewn throughout the realm, giving birth to those who lived beyond death. However, today we learn that spirits who come into contact with Deathroot become those who live in death. We also know from Roger.
Do you know of those who live in death? The very notion of life in death defies the Golden Order. These souls have committed no offense. They have every right to life, only they happen to touch upon a flaw in the Order.
As it turned out, it might have been they were following another forgotten law of reality. If there was a Law of the Undying that was on par with the other Golden Order fundamentalist spells, that would further explain how Fia was able to gestate her mending rune, which was able to mend the Elden Ring, even though those who live in death were widely persecuted for violating the Golden Order. I'm really interested to see if the DLC is going to use any of this cut content. In any case, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know what yins think.